I woke up to a sound that no one ever wants to hear in the middle of the night. A high-pitched blaring alarm that rattled my bones, tires screeching on pavement, and flashing blue and red lights dancing across my bedroom walls. It was 3:17 a.m., and my heart was pounding so hard I thought it was going to explode. For a moment, I just laid there, dazed, unsure if I was still dreaming or if something had gone terribly wrong. But then I heard it. The unmistakable sound of sirens wailing down my street. I threw off the covers and stumbled to the window, praying it wasn't anything serious. What I saw made my stomach drop straight into my feet. The entire street was lit up like a crime scene, officers with guns drawn, storming the block like they were preparing for a raid. Radios crackled as they barked orders, moving with military precision. My first instinct was to hit the floor and dive into the safest corner, but something held me there, staring out the window. My Jeep was gone, the one I had carefully parked right in front of my house, just as the police task force had told me to, and in its place, a bright orange traffic cone, and attached to that cone was a sticky note scrawled with the words, "Code violation, HOA confiscated." I rubbed my eyes, trying to make sense of it. The Jeep, my vehicle, the one with months of covert surveillance equipment inside, was gone. Stolen. By my own homeowners association. It wasn't just a stolen car. It was a federal surveillance vehicle, one that had been part of a major investigation. I felt my blood run cold. The worst part? I had no idea who had taken it or why. But I knew immediately that this was going to be a nightmare. I had spent the past few weeks quietly blending into the neighborhood, hoping to finally settle down after years of serving overseas, moving from city to city, never feeling like I had a true home. Willow Creek Estates was supposed to be different. It was supposed to be peaceful. Quiet streets, friendly neighbors, a backyard for my dog, and a garage big enough for my motorcycles. For the first few weeks, everything was perfect. Neighbors waved when they saw me, kids played in the cul-de-sac, and it smelled like barbecue on warm nights. It was everything I had hoped for. But then I met Linda Farthington. She was the HOA president, and, if I'm being honest, she was the epitome of what we all now call a Karen. Not just a stickler for the rules, but the enforcer of them. If you didn't know Linda, she seemed nice enough at first, but once she got a glimpse of something she didn't like, she was relentless. Every week, I'd find a new passive-aggressive letter on my door about something I had allegedly done wrong. Your grass is half an inch too tall. Your Halloween decorations are still up past October 31st. You're parking too close to your garage door. It was always something. But what really caught her attention, what truly set her off, was my Jeep. The one that she insisted didn't belong in the neighborhood. That's when things took a turn for the worse. The first time I met Linda, I was washing my Jeep in the driveway when she came marching over, her lips pressed tight in a disapproving frown. She didn't even say hello. Instead, she just stared at the Jeep with this look on her face, as if it had personally offended her. "That doesn't belong in this neighborhood," she said, almost sneering at it. "It looks like it escaped from a demolition derby." I tried to stay calm, explaining that the Jeep was a part of my consulting work with local law enforcement, that it wasn't some random vehicle. It was a tool, equipped with surveillance gear for an ongoing investigation. But she wasn't having it. "Nice story, soldier boy," she scoffed. "Next time, try a Honda like a normal person." That was the moment I realized I was in trouble. Linda wasn't just annoying. She was out for blood, and my Jeep was her target. She wasn't the type to let go of things, especially if they didn't meet her standards of proper in Willow Creek. From that day forward, every week I would get a new letter from her, all about something my Jeep had supposedly violated. Unauthorized vehicle modifications, excessive tactical aesthetics, and my personal favorite, parking intimidation. I had no idea how a parked Jeep could intimidate anyone, but Linda had a way of turning even the most trivial thing into a major issue. What she didn't know, and what I was determined to keep quiet, was that the Jeep wasn't just some souped-up off-roading vehicle. It had been outfitted with covert surveillance equipment as part of a task force operation targeting a drug ring that had infiltrated our neighborhood. The police had asked me if they could use it as a stationary surveillance node. The Jeep was perfect for the job. Its intimidating look blended in, and no one ever suspected it was anything more than a rugged off-road vehicle. Inside, it was a completely different story. Remote cameras, GPS trackers, and digital recorders. The task force's instructions were simple. Keep it parked in front of my house, rotate its angle every few days, and don't move it without letting them know. I even installed a heavy-duty lock on the front wheel, not just to keep it secure, but to make it clear that this wasn't some junker sitting around collecting dust. It was a working vehicle, one that, unbeknownst to Linda, had an important role to play in an ongoing investigation. But of course, Linda didn't see it that way. She just saw a vehicle that didn't meet her idea of what should be allowed in the neighborhood. And for some reason, that drove her crazy. Her obsession with my Jeep escalated quickly. She reported it 5 times, 5, for being an abandoned vehicle. Each time she insisted that I was violating HOA rules. No matter how many times I explained that it wasn't abandoned and that it was parked legally, Linda didn't care. She kept pushing, insisting she had the right to remove what she saw as a neighborhood eyesore. And eventually, that's exactly what she did. One afternoon when I was running errands, Linda decided to take matters into her own hands. She called in a private tow service, a shady one that didn't ask questions, and armed with bolt cutters, she marched over to my Jeep, cut the lock off, and had it towed away. My neighbor Rick, who was always home and who had a Ring camera set up, caught the whole thing. He even caught her looking right into the camera after cutting the lock, smirking as she said, "One less eyesore to worry about." By the time I got back, my Jeep was gone. I thought it had been stolen, but when I saw the orange cone and the note, I knew I was dealing with something much bigger than just a stolen car. I knocked on Linda's door, but she didn't answer. Instead, I got an email from the HOA stating that my vehicle had been relocated to prevent visual pollution and ensure community standards. I was livid, but that was nothing compared to what came next. I called the police task force immediately. When they showed up, the looks on their faces said it all. This wasn't just a stolen Jeep. It was a federal operation that had just been destroyed. What Linda didn't know, or perhaps didn't care to know, was that the Jeep wasn't just an eyesore to her. It was part of a major covert operation for the police. The task force had asked me to park it right in front of my house as a stationary surveillance node. I had no idea what was really going on, but I had trusted them when they told me this Jeep, despite its intimidating look, would be part of an undercover operation to take down a drug ring in our neighborhood. The beauty of it was that the Jeep's military-grade modifications, its blackout plating, reinforced bumpers, and rough, no-nonsense appearance, helped it blend into the neighborhood without raising suspicion. It wasn't just a parked vehicle, it was a high-tech surveillance unit. Equipped with remote cameras, GPS trackers, and a hidden recording unit, my Jeep was silently monitoring the very people Linda probably considered upstanding citizens. The task force had been using it to monitor movements, intercept communications, and gather intelligence on the criminals operating in our community. And that was the very reason it had to stay exactly where it was, right in front of my house. There were strict instructions. Don't move it without notifying the task force first. Rotate it slightly every few days to keep the angles fresh. And most importantly, don't let anyone mess with it. The whole thing was a delicate operation, and Linda's constant harassment about my Jeep was only one of the issues I had to deal with. The other? Making sure my neighbors didn't start asking too many questions. I had to keep the whole thing under wraps, even though it was clear that my Jeep was already a point of contention for Linda. I had to laugh at how her disdain for my Jeep, the very thing that made it perfect for this surveillance job, was what led to its selection in the first place. But Linda wasn't concerned about any of that. She just wanted to get rid of it. She had been watching my Jeep like a hawk, waiting for the first opportunity to strike. And that's when she did it, when I wasn't around. One afternoon, I had stepped out to run a few errands, thinking I'd be gone for just a couple of hours. Little did I know that while I was away, Linda decided that she couldn't stand the sight of my vehicle any longer. She took it upon herself to deal with what she perceived as a neighborhood eyesore, going rogue as usual. She hired a private tow service, probably a sketchy one that didn't ask too many questions, and then she showed up, armed with bolt cutters, ready to make her move. And just like that, Linda marched up to my Jeep, cut the lock like it was some unwanted bike, and had it towed away without a second thought. It wasn't enough to simply file a complaint or send yet another passive-aggressive letter. No, she had to act. She had to be the one to decide what was right for the neighborhood, whether I liked it or not. Meanwhile, my neighbor Rick, who always seemed to be around and had that Ring camera set up, caught the entire thing. I didn't know it at the time, but Rick had been watching the whole drama unfold, recording Linda as she walked up to my Jeep with those bolt cutters, cutting through the lock like it was a piece of cake. And what's worse, she didn't even seem to care. After she'd towed the Jeep, she looked directly into Rick's camera and smirked, making some comment about it being one less eyesore to worry about. I was absolutely floored when I found out. When I came home that day, my Jeep was gone. At first, I thought it had been stolen. I mean, I couldn't fathom that someone would have the audacity to just take it. But then I saw the orange cone with the sticky note attached to it. The note, of course, had the usual HOA speak. Code violation. HOA confiscated. I had to read it twice just to let it sink in. My Jeep wasn't stolen. It had been confiscated by the HOA, by Linda herself no less. I couldn't believe it. I rushed over to Linda's house, furious, pounding on her door, but she wouldn't answer. Instead, I got an email from her, acting all official and smug, saying the HOA had relocated my non-compliant vehicle to prevent visual pollution and ensure community standards. I couldn't even respond to the email at first. I was so angry I couldn't think straight. How could she get away with this? And then it hit me. There was something much bigger at stake here. My Jeep wasn't just some beater parked on the street. It wasn't just an eyesore. It was a federal vehicle. And inside that Jeep were months of surveillance footage, critical information that could bring down a whole criminal enterprise. I had to do something fast. So I immediately called the task force and explained what had happened. I could barely get the words out. When they heard about what Linda had done, I could hear the anger in their voices. This wasn't just some neighborhood dispute anymore. Linda had just destroyed a vital piece of the operation. She had essentially killed months of hard work. And for what? Because my Jeep didn't meet her idea of what was acceptable in the neighborhood? I had to get it back. But the real problem was, I had no idea where Linda had taken it. The task force was livid, and they were at my house within 30 minutes, ready to figure out what happened and get my Jeep back. They were furious when I explained what had happened, and the urgency in their voices made it clear that the situation was way more serious than I had even realized. It wasn't just about a stolen vehicle anymore. It was about tampering with a federal surveillance operation. We were talking about months of undercover work, evidence gathering, and tracking movements that had now been completely compromised. Officer Melendez, who had been overseeing the operation, looked like he wanted to scream. "Do you know what this means?" he asked. I nodded, sweating bullets. The Jeep wasn't just some car. It was evidence, it was equipment, and it was critical to the task force's investigation. Not only had Linda disrupted an ongoing investigation, but she had tampered with federal property and obstructed justice. The whole task force was now scrambling to figure out where she had taken the vehicle. It was clear that she hadn't just taken it to a tow lot. No, this was personal. She had stashed it somewhere private, somewhere off the record. The only problem was, no one knew where that somewhere was. The task force launched an emergency retrieval order, but even after scouring every local tow lot, the Jeep was nowhere to be found. I could feel the clock ticking as the task force scrambled to figure out where Linda had hidden the Jeep. The operation was in jeopardy, and the suspects in the drug ring were already starting to get nervous. They'd know something was up. And it wasn't just the investigation that was on the line. It was the integrity of everything the task force had worked for. I had to find that Jeep. I had to find it before Linda could do any more damage, before she could compromise any more of the case. But what made this even worse was that while I was waiting for the task force to work their magic, the clock was running out on an investigation that could have taken down an entire criminal organization. The next morning, the phone rang. It was Officer Melendez. "We found the Jeep," he said. I don't think I've ever heard someone sound so relieved and so angry at the same time. I could hear the tension in his voice. "You're going to want to see this." My stomach dropped as I threw on a hoodie and rushed out the door. The next few minutes felt like a blur. Melendez pulled up in an unmarked black SUV, his jaw clenched tight, and motioned for me to get in. I didn't know what to expect, but I knew one thing. Whatever was about to unfold was going to be bad. The ride to wherever the Jeep had been hidden felt like a lifetime. Melendez didn't say a word as we drove through winding back roads, taking me to a place I'd never been before. 10 minutes later, we arrived at an old rusted gate behind an HOA maintenance shed. I had no idea this place even existed, and when I saw it, I couldn't believe my eyes. There it was, my Jeep, sitting crooked and scratched up like it had been dumped without a care. The driver's side mirror was shattered, and when I looked inside, I saw the damage. The surveillance equipment was gone, ripped out like someone had been trying to tear apart a priceless artifact. I was in shock, unable to fully grasp what had happened. But what I realized in that moment was that Linda had just ruined everything. Not just for me, but for everyone involved in this operation. The task force's months of work had just been dismantled because Linda couldn't stand the sight of my Jeep. She had no idea what she had done. But I knew this was just the beginning. The next morning, I stood on my porch at exactly 3:17 a.m., feeling like the ground had shifted beneath me in a way I couldn't quite understand. The flashing blue and red lights, still flickering on the street like a bad dream, now felt like a surreal echo of everything that had gone wrong. Officers had deployed in force, no longer just the task force team, but a full squad of officers now moving through the streets like they were preparing for some kind of high-stakes operation. The problem? They were missing one vital component, the very vehicle that had been central to their entire mission. My Jeep. It wasn't just a missing vehicle at this point. It was the loss of their surveillance tool, their eyes on the ground. Without it, the entire operation was compromised. I couldn't help but watch in horror as federal agents stood outside my house, huddling and murmuring, clearly furious. The whole thing was unraveling right in front of me. As officers stormed the street, I could tell they were struggling to keep their composure. One agent after another walked by, each of them giving me looks that ranged from disbelief to anger. The urgency in the air was palpable, and the task force's frustration was obvious. I could hear them muttering to each other, words like critical, backup, and we need to locate it now. But the problem was, no one had a clue where Linda had hidden my Jeep. She had managed to get her hands on it, but where did she take it after that? The task force didn't know. The tow service she'd used wasn't exactly forthcoming with information. I could feel the heat rise in my chest as I realized how badly everything had just gone south. The worst part? The operation that had been months in the making, with the goal of bringing down an entire drug ring in our neighborhood, was now effectively over. The suspects were on the run, spooked by the sudden disappearance of the surveillance vehicle they hadn't even realized was tracking their every move. They were slipping through the cracks, knowing something had gone wrong. I felt like I was stuck in the middle of a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. The task force had no choice but to call off the operation, but I could tell the agents were furious. They had invested so much into this sting, and one rogue act by Linda had torn it all apart. It was beyond frustrating, more than just a personal betrayal of trust. It was a public failure that could cost the law enforcement community months of work, not to mention resources and time. The sense of defeat was heavy, and it felt like the very air around me was thick with tension. I tried to take some solace in the fact that at least the task force was moving quickly to fix things, but that didn't change the fact that Linda had gotten away with this, at least for the time being. I spent hours pacing back and forth on the porch, feeling like I was losing my mind. I had no idea where my Jeep was. All I knew was that Linda had somehow managed to hide it, to strip away any trace of its importance. And I couldn't just sit around waiting for some miracle. I had to know where it was, and more importantly, I had to stop Linda from destroying any more critical evidence. But just as I was about to give in to the anxiety creeping up on me, the phone rang. It was Officer Melendez. "We found the Jeep," he said, his voice tense but with a note of relief. My heart skipped a beat, and for a second, I couldn't process what he was saying. "We found it," I asked, my voice coming out much shakier than I'd intended. "Where is it? What's going on?" He didn't waste any time. "Meet me in 20 minutes. I'll explain everything when you get here." The urgency in his tone made it clear this wasn't just some casual update. Something was wrong. But at least there was hope. The Jeep had been located. It wasn't lost forever. I threw on a hoodie, grabbed my keys, and rushed out the door. As I hopped into my car, my mind raced. What had happened? Where had they found it? Was it in one piece? I couldn't shake the feeling that I was about to walk into a situation that would only make everything worse. When I met Melendez, he didn't say much. His jaw was clenched, and I could tell he was trying to keep it together, but his anger was barely contained. We didn't talk during the drive. The silence was tense, filled with unspoken questions, but I knew that whatever had happened, we were headed straight into the heart of this mess. The drive felt endless, twisting through back roads that took me further away from familiar territory. As we pulled up to a rusted gate behind what I later found out was an HOA maintenance shed, I felt a pit form in my stomach. This wasn't some impound lot, or even a spot where they might store abandoned vehicles. No, this was private. And the moment I saw the place, I knew something was off. Melendez didn't say a word. He just motioned for me to follow him as we walked past the rusting gate and into the lot. What I saw next made my heart stop. There it was, my Jeep in all its battered glory, sitting crookedly in the far corner of the lot. It was scratched up, covered in dirt, and looked like it had been abandoned. The driver's side mirror was shattered, and the surveillance gear that had once been hidden inside was gone. It was as if someone had torn it apart. The small black case that housed the encrypted surveillance drive was wide open, completely gutted. The sight hit me harder than I expected. I just stood there, staring at the mess in disbelief. This wasn't just a vehicle that had been towed away. It had been violated, destroyed. The evidence inside wasn't just gone. It was ruined. Melendez swore under his breath as he began taking photos, but even his usual calm demeanor was slipping. "This isn't a tow lot," he muttered, kicking aside a cone. "This is a damn private graveyard for vehicles. This woman's been running her own impound operation out of a shed." I walked around the Jeep slowly, taking it all in. Scuff marks covered the wheel wells, mud caked into the suspension. Someone had clearly tried to pry open the glove box with a screwdriver. The surveillance equipment, the heart of the operation, was gone. I felt a sickening wave of guilt wash over me. All of this, every single piece of it, had been my responsibility. And now it was all in pieces, not just physically, but legally. The task force's investigation had been ruined, and it was my job to fix it. The entire time, Melendez was moving fast, taking photos, documenting every bit of damage, every sign of tampering. I could see it in his eyes. He was trying to keep it together, but the weight of it was crushing. This wasn't just about a stolen vehicle anymore. This was about obstruction, tampering with federal property, destruction of evidence. And every minute we spent here, standing in the middle of this private HOA graveyard, was another minute that the task force had lost in trying to recover from Linda's mess. As Melendez called in for backup, a federal evidence team, and more officers to secure the site, I felt the tension reach a boiling point. It was bad. But what came next made everything feel even worse. As we were gathering the last bits of evidence, Karen Farthington herself appeared. She wasn't in a rush. She didn't seem like someone who had just made the biggest mistake of her life. No, she walked up to the scene in heels, clip-clopping through the gravel like she was arriving at a garden party. "Oh good, you found it," she said, cheerful as ever, as if this was all just part of some neighborhood drama. I was floored. "You're the one who took it," I snapped, my voice low but full of anger. She just blinked at me, completely unfazed. "I was going to notify you," she said, waving it off like it was no big deal. "I assumed you knew the HOA was within its rights to remove unauthorized vehicles." Melendez stepped forward, his face turning hard. "Ma'am, step away from the vehicle." His voice was ice cold. He wasn't playing games anymore. Linda seemed confused, but before she could say another word, he was on her. "You took federal property without authorization. You understand how serious that is?" The look on Linda's face changed. She wasn't smug anymore. She wasn't trying to play it off. She looked almost panicked. But it was too late. The damage was done. The task force was ready. And now it was time for her to face the consequences of her actions. Linda wasn't prepared for what came next. She might have thought she could get away with this. Might have thought she'd simply make some excuse about removing a neighborhood eyesore, and that would be the end of it. But the look in Melendez's eyes told her everything had just changed. He wasn't asking questions anymore. He was making decisions. His voice, still calm but carrying a weight of authority, cut through the tension. "Ma'am, step away from the vehicle." She blinked, confused, clearly still thinking she was in control of the situation. "Excuse me?" she asked, her voice shaky now, trying to muster that same bravado she had back when she was the untouchable HOA president. "I'm the HOA president. I have the authority to remove any unauthorized vehicles from this community." Melendez didn't flinch. "Not like this. Not federal property. Not without authorization. You've broken the law." The shift in her expression was immediate. She had no idea what she had done, or how deep she had just dug herself into a hole. She was the president of the HOA, but now she was facing something far bigger than her petty neighborhood rules. "I thought it was abandoned," Linda stammered, but her excuse fell flat. "It had a lock on it," she added weakly. "I didn't know what it was. It looked abandoned. I was doing the neighborhood a favor." I watched, stunned, as she continued to dig herself deeper, believing that somehow she could explain away her actions, like this was just another HOA fine waiting to be paid. "No, Linda," I said, my voice barely holding back the anger. "You didn't just remove a car. You messed with a federal operation. That Jeep was part of a law enforcement investigation. It wasn't abandoned. It was part of a surveillance operation. Do you have any idea what you've done? But she just stood there, her face twisted in disbelief, still trying to act like the victim. I'm the one who's been harassed by that vehicle. I had every right. Melendez cut her off, stepping closer, his voice firm and final. No, you didn't. You've just obstructed justice, and you're about to find out how serious that is. By now, the other officers were closing in, and I could see them taking note of everything. They were already working on securing the scene. I could feel the weight of what was happening sinking in. Linda had no clue what was coming. She had thought she could bully everyone around her, but now she was up against the full force of the law. The tension in the air was thick as Melendez and the team began to take charge, but Linda wasn't backing down. She was still trying to argue her case, still trying to assert her so-called authority. I could see the defiance in her eyes, but there was something different about her now. It wasn't the same confidence she had when she was dictating every little rule in the neighborhood. She was now playing a losing hand, and she knew it. Melendez didn't waste any more time with her. You're going to need to come with us, he said, nodding toward the officers, who moved in to place her in custody. This is over. You're done here. Linda's mouth fell open, a look of shock crossing her face. She couldn't believe it. This wasn't supposed to happen. Not to her. She had been untouchable, the queen of her little HOA kingdom, but now she was about to be dragged into the real world, where her petty rules and tyrannical control had no place. You can't do this, she said, trying to regain some semblance of control. But it was too late. The officers were already leading her away, her protests growing more frantic. I'm the HOA president. You can't do this to me. I've been serving this community for years. But no one was listening to her now. They were taking her away, and there was nothing she could do about it. As she was escorted off the scene, I watched the last of her arrogance evaporate. Linda wasn't the powerful figure she had once been. She wasn't the woman who had terrorized the neighborhood with fines, threats, and petty power plays. Now she was just another person facing the consequences of their actions, and I couldn't help but feel a small sense of satisfaction as I watched her go. But it wasn't just about her getting arrested. It was what came next that was even more surprising. Rick, my neighbor, who had been documenting everything on his Ring camera, came forward with the footage. He had recorded the entire incident, from when Linda first approached my Jeep with the bolt cutters to the moment she towed it away. And then, on top of that, Rick had been collecting everything. Letters, messages, the weird rants Linda had made at HOA meetings, even posts on the community Facebook group where she proudly boasted about her cleaning up the neighborhood one rusty car at a time. Rick had it all. He handed over the footage and documentation to the officers, and it was clear that this was more than just a case of stolen property. It was obstruction of justice. It was illegal towing. It was tampering with federal evidence. And worst of all, it was all done without any authority. No HOA vote, no paperwork, no legal process. Linda had acted completely on her own, driven by a personal vendetta against my Jeep. The officers were thorough. They took the footage, examined the evidence, and pieced together exactly what had happened. As they did, I could feel the pieces of the puzzle falling into place. Linda had gone rogue, thinking she could control everything, and now her actions were coming back to haunt her. By the time they finished going through everything, Linda's fate was sealed. They had enough evidence to charge her with obstruction, illegal towing, destruction of federal property, and tampering with an ongoing investigation. The legal wheels were already turning, and Linda's world was starting to crumble. But things didn't stop there. The fallout from Linda's actions was swift and massive. I got a call later that day from Detective Sasha Lynn, who had been leading the task force. We're evaluating charges, she said, her voice sharp. Tampering with federal property, Obstruction of justice, destruction of evidence. She's in deep. The gravity of what had happened was beginning to sink in, and Sasha made it clear that Linda's actions would have serious consequences. "We're passing it along to the DA," she said. "You should prepare for the fallout. People like her don't go down quietly." And she was right. The next day, the neighborhood was buzzing with news. Word spread like wildfire about what Linda had done. The HOA was in turmoil, and Linda had become the focal point of everything that was wrong with that whole system. But just when I thought things couldn't get crazier, Linda did the unthinkable. She called an emergency HOA meeting. But it wasn't to apologize. Oh no, it wasn't to take responsibility for her actions. It was to justify everything she'd done, to explain how she was the real victim in all of this. The audacity of it all left me speechless. She actually planned to spin the whole situation as her trying to protect the neighborhood from an eyesore, to claim she was simply doing her duty, keeping the community safe from abandoned vehicles and crime. But what Linda didn't realize was that everyone had already seen the evidence. Everyone knew what she had done. When the meeting was held, it was packed. Not just with the usual neighborhood residents, but with reporters, legal experts, and even a few serious-looking folks in dark suits who weren't there for free cookies. Everyone was waiting for Linda to explain herself, and when she finally walked in, 15 minutes late, wearing her signature bright red blazer, it was clear she wasn't ready for what was coming. She stood at the front of the room, clipboard in hand, tapping the microphone like she was about to give a TED talk. "Thank you all for coming," she began, her voice syrupy sweet. "I'd like to address the recent incident regarding the removal of an unauthorized vehicle." She went on to explain how she had done the neighborhood a favor, how the Jeep had been abandoned, how it was all a misunderstanding. She had no idea that this was only the beginning of her downfall. I didn't let her finish. I stood up, interrupting her, and said, "You cut the lock off a federal vehicle. You towed it without permission. You bragged about it on Facebook. You didn't just break HOA rules, you broke the law." The room went silent, and I could see Linda's face go pale as I walked to the front, pulling out a small USB drive. I handed it to the IT guy, and within moments, the screen flickered to life. First came the ring cam footage. There was Linda cutting the lock, smirking into the camera as she did it. And then came the Facebook screenshots, one by one. The posts, the mocking comments, the "I did you all a favor" attitude. The room was stunned. There was no denying what she had done. Linda was no longer the queen of Willow Creek Estates. She was a criminal, and now the whole neighborhood knew it.